What up, dog? Hello, my fellow Alpha Male 2.0s and aspiring Alpha Male 2.0s. I am coming to you again, once again, from Asuncion, Paraguay, and this is a perfect country and a perfect place for me right now to discuss this particular topic. And this particular topic has to do with a particular excuse that I have heard for many, many years, almost a decade now, when I discuss the concept of moving out of the collapsing Western world. And specifically, this is an excuse used by Americans. Some non-Americans, but usually it's Americans who use this excuse. So for the rest of this podcast, this will be targeted to my ex-fellow Americans, you Americans who still live in the United States. If you are not an American, if you do not live in the United States, some of this stuff will apply to you. I want to make sure that some of this content will still apply to you. But the thrust of this topic today is geared towards my ex-fellow Americans, those of you who are Americans and still live in the United States. And first, I want to give a disclaimer. I've said this many times. If you don't want to move out of the collapsing Western world, if you don't want to move out of the United States, if you want to stay there for the indefinite future or the rest of your life, that's fine. I'm not here to try to convince you otherwise. It's your life. I am an individualism absolutist. You should do literally whatever you want with your life, regardless of whether or not I think it's a good idea. If you want to stay in the United States, if you want to get traditionally monogamously married and live like a beta male, if you want to go get a corporate job and invest all your retirement into the stock market, that, in my opinion, in my strong opinion, and I have a lot of facts to back up my opinions, is literally everything wrong. But if you want to do that, you go right ahead, bro. You do you, boo. Do it. Go ahead. It's your life. It's not my life. It's no skin off my ass. If you get destroyed, it doesn't really bother me. Certainly now that I live very, very, very far away from the United States, and I am happy to do so. So if you want to stay wherever you're going to stay, that's fine with me. It really doesn't bother me emotionally. That's okay. What I do want for you is to make that decision based on facts and not feelings. Facts and not opinions that you can't back up. Facts and not hopes. And much of the world, most of the Western world, frankly, today is run on feelings and hopes and fantasies and not facts and realities. So if you're going to make the decision to stay in the collapsing West, to stay in the collapsing United States, or for that matter, stay in cuckoo Canada or suicidal Europe, if you really want to stay in these places, that's fine, as long as you're making that decision based on facts. And there's a hell of a lot of you who are making that decision not based on any facts. You're just basing it on feelings. And as Ben Shapiro says, Ben Shapiro, who I completely disagree with, Ben Shapiro says, facts don't care about your feelings. Unfortunately, he is not a very good mascot for this. Ben Shapiro is a guy who literally doesn't shave with an electric razor below his chin line because his religion tells him not to. So there's a perfect example of running your life based on feelings and not facts. So I wish he would actually live in a way that he's actually promoting. Unfortunately, he doesn't. But anyway, I digress. So that all being said, this particular excuse is something I hear from Americans. And I have been hearing this excuse all the way back to 2012 when I first started discussing the topic of me moving out of the United States back in 2012. And even back then, I got this excuse. And I wrote several articles dealing with this excuse. And I'm still seeing this excuse all over YouTube and all over my other social media and other content when I talk about how it might be a good idea for you who have the wherewithal to do so to move out of the collapsing West, particularly moving out of the United States. And the excuse is basically this. It's Americans saying, well, moving out of America is useless because if America collapses, the entire world will collapse. And every country on planet Earth will instantly be transformed into a shithole when America collapses. So moving out of America to help you prevent any problems from an American collapse doesn't make any sense. Okay. Let me give you all the reasons why that is completely untrue, that is absolute bullshit, and people who make that excuse are basically blowing smoke up their own ass. That is incorrect. So let me give you several aspects of why that is incorrect. Number one, top of the list. It might surprise you Americans to know, my ex-fellow Americans, it might surprise you to know that there are various countries all over the world that have very little to do with the United States. And in terms of their international trade, have very little to do with the almighty, all-powerful United States. I know that is difficult for Americans to comprehend. Americans are very insular. Americans are like those people from like the 1500s who thought that the universe revolved around the planet Earth and the sun and the moon and the stars all revolved around the planet Earth. Americans tend to be like this. They think the entire world revolves around America. And in certain respects it does, and in many respects it doesn't. Exhibit A, I am here in Paraguay. And Paraguay, one of the reasons I have chosen Paraguay as one of my primary flags is, as I've discussed at my blogs and articles and past content, Paraguay is one of these countries where if America collapsed tomorrow, people in Paraguay wouldn't even notice the difference. They would hear about it on the news. It would be an interesting topic of conversation, but the typical life of the typical average Paraguayan would not change one fucking iota. Paraguay is a little tiny landlocked country in the middle of nowhere in South America, deep South America, and it has very little to do in terms of direct trade with the United States, or even indirect trade with the United States. So I'm sorry, but there are lots of countries like Paraguay, dotted all over the world, that really have very little, if anything, to do with trade with the United States, or the American dollar, or the American petrodollar, or the American military empire, or Americans' fiat currency, or the Federal Reserve, or any of these things. I know that's shocking. I know it's shocking to hear, but it's true. Now, are there massive trading partners that will go down when the United States goes down? Yes. Number one on top of that list is Canada. That's why I think it is absolutely ridiculous and stupid for Americans to move to Canada. What the fuck are you doing? You're just exchanging one collapsing Western nation for another one. I've talked about this before. So are there countries that will suffer badly when, not if, when the United States collapses in our lifetime? Oh, hell yes. I'm not saying every country in the world will be fine. I am saying that there are some countries in the world that will be moderately affected and other countries that will be barely affected at all, and I'm sitting in one of them right now, Paraguay. What a lot of Americans and Westerners do is they state things in terms of the Western world as if the Western world is the whole world. So when you talk to Americans in particular, about moving out of the United States, they will immediately start thinking of other Western countries to move to. Well, okay, I could move to England, I could move to Australia, I could move to New Zealand, I could move to Canada, right? In some cases, you might get someone say, oh, I can move to Israel, all these Western countries, who are, by the way, for the most part, collapsing as well. The concept of moving out of the United States to a non-Western country doesn't even enter into the brain of the typical American because they are too Western-centric. And part of this overly Western-centric thought process is, well, if America collapses, every country on earth will also collapse. So I will suffer just as badly if I live in Argentina or Cambodia or wherever the hell as if I lived in the United States. Now, let me give you the second concept of this. And I've talked about this many times before, and I'm happy to repeat this. Often I will have guys who say, well, Caleb, you move out of the United States. A lot of your customers are still in the United States. So when the United States collapses, you're going to be just as fucked as people in the United States because you rely on income from the United States. Now, that is why I have said one of my primary business goals, and I'm not quite there yet, but I'll be there soon, is to have only 40% of my total income from all of my businesses and all of my income streams to come from the collapsing trifecta, meaning the collapsing USA, cuckoo Canada, and suicidal Europe. So if you add up Europe, Canada, and the United States in terms of my business operations, I want that total income to be less than 40% of my total income. I want 60% of my income to come from countries outside of the collapsing trifecta. Now, am I there yet? Not quite. But I get closer every few months and certainly every year. In a few short years, I will be there. 60%, maybe even 70%. So that's my barrier of protection against that. Now, even if that wasn't true, even if that's not true, even if it's 50% or 40% instead of 60%, let me demonstrate something to you. If you are in the United States and you have 100% of your income from United States sources, and most or all of your investments are United States investments, and I live in Dubai, and only a percentage of my income comes from the United States, and 0% of my investments are American investments, and I don't live in the United States, when the United States collapses, will there be a difference in the levels of problems between you and me? Yes, I will be inconvenienced and you will be fucked. There is a difference between being inconvenienced and being fucked. You're going to be fucked and I will be inconvenienced. Now, I'll be honest with you. If the United States collapsed tomorrow morning, yes, I would have some problems in my financial life and my business life. Some. Now, as a side point, some of my investments would make a shitload of money and I would probably make over $1 million almost instantaneously for some of my investments because, as I've said many times, most of my investments are geared towards the Western world collapsing. That's why in 2020, while everybody was crying, I more than doubled my entire investment portfolio in terms of value. But that's a side point. Let's say even that doesn't happen. Yes, I would have some problems in some of my businesses and some of my income streams and even some of my Five Flag stuff. Some problems. Would I be fucked? No, I would not be fucked. My lifestyle would go on pretty much unabated. Me and Pink Firefly would be just fine. Is that true of you if you are an American currently living in the United States with 100% American sources and a lot of American investments and American debts and American family members and American FBs and MLTRs and OLTRs? Would that be you? No, you'd be fucked. And you've got to understand there's a difference in the level of severity with these problems. There's a difference between inconvenienced and having some problems and being totally fucked. I don't know about you, but I don't want to ever be totally fucked. Ever in my life. Ever. That's one of the many reasons I left the United States. Now, that's not the reason I left the United States. Avoiding a Western collapse and United States collapse was about reason number 4 on my list. Reason number 1 was tax reasons and investment reasons and things like that. So that's not the only reason I left. But you get my point. There is a difference between being fucked and being inconvenienced. And so if you live in a foreign land, far away from the United States, even if it has some trading partner relationship with the United States, and many countries do, probably most countries do, there will be a difference in the level of problems you will experience as a person living in that country versus being in the United States and being fucked. And I'm going to repeat, yes, there are some countries where you would barely even notice a difference. I'm not kidding. I live here in Paraguay. If the United States collapsed tomorrow morning, they wouldn't even fucking notice a difference here in Paraguay. They wouldn't notice a difference. They wouldn't. A few high-end legal firms downtown Asuncion might have some problems with a few of their clients. That's about it, man. That's really it. They'd be fine here. So no, it is false to say that every country in the world would collapse when the United States collapse. So no, it is false to say that every country in the world will also collapse when the United States collapses. False. I'm sorry, not true. Now, third point to this, and I'm just going to run through this list really quick because I've written about this list before. The rise of China and the rise of Asia. Will China suffer when the United States collapses? Yes. China will have some real problems. Will other parts of Asia also have problems when the United States collapses? Yes. Japan will be totally fucked. But as I've said before, Japan is collapsing anyway. It is the only nation in Asia that is collapsing. So Japan is collapsing regardless of what happens to the goddamn United States. Now, does that mean that China would collapse also? China would go down to the United States? No. Incorrect. I'm just going to run down this list of several things China is doing to take over the world in the 21st century. And by the way, everything that happened with COVID in 2020 and is still happening now has hurt the West and benefited China, even though it was China's fault, which is kind of hilarious. So China has greatly benefited by what has happened to the world over the past year and a half, when the West has actually been hurt by what has happened. All right, so really quick on the rise of China. Number 1, China is coming up with their own Chinese-controlled SWIFT system. This is an alternative to the American-based SWIFT system, which is a system that all banks use to do wire transfers. They're coming up with their own version of SWIFT with the other BRICS nations, which is like Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and things like that. Number 2, the destruction of the petrodollar. China is getting around America's monopoly on the dollar. And if you didn't know, in order to buy and sell oil, you have to actually take your funds, convert them to dollars, and then use those dollars to buy oil. It's called the petrodollar. It's one of the reasons that America has stayed on top of the world since the 1950s, really since World War II. China and Russia don't like that. So China and Russia are doing deals with each other, as well as deals with places like Iran, India, several other countries, where they're doing things like gold and other basis of transactions other than the American dollar. Number 3, China has come up with a direct competitor to the IMF called the NDB, and they have dumped hundreds of billions of dollars into this goddamn thing. And so this will also help benefit China when America collapses. I could do a whole podcast on that and get into particulars. Not going to detail about that. Number 4, The big thing that I'm excited about, and one of the many reasons I chose to move to Asia, because Dubai is technically in Asia, is the new Silk Road, the Belt and Road project that is a $1 trillion project where China is building shipping lanes, high-speed transit lanes, oil pipelines, and various other things to connect China to India, Europe, the Middle East, and other parts of Asia. Trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars will be made using this Belt and Road system over the next several decades, even if and even when the United States collapses. Will this project take a hit? Yes. Will it collapse? No. Once that system is done, you're going to have economic activity that will explode all over the East. It's going to be crazy. There are 68 countries who are ready to spend $8 trillion to make this happen. And none of those countries are the United States. None of them. This is one of the most exciting worldwide projects in the world, and the goddamn United States has literally nothing to do with this. Again, that's one of the many reasons I chose Dubai, because I'm right in striking distance of those shipping lanes, and I intend to personally make a lot of money using the One Belt, One Road system when it comes online. It's already starting to come online now. Number 5, China essentially owns Africa and much of Oceania already. That's a very big topic. I've written about this in great detail in my blogs. Africa is full of diamond mines, natural gas, oil, all kinds of very valuable natural resources. And while the stupid United States is jerking around in the Middle East with all these stupid, useless wars, thanks Trump, thanks Biden, thanks Obama, thanks George W. Bush, what happens instead is China is in Africa building an empire based on debt of these countries, where China basically owns the balls of most of these countries in Africa. And again, this has nothing whatsoever to do with the United States. Does the United States own Africa? No, China does. So when, not if, when the United States collapses, China will still own, quote unquote, all these countries and all these resources in Africa and much of Oceania. Next one is, and I've written articles about this, the work ethic. When you compare China, specifically Chinese, but most Asian cultures, to the work ethic of Americans, it's not even close. I've written an article when I was in Shanghai one time. I was sitting in an office building and I was working late, and I could look across the way into another office building, and it was Friday night at 5 p.m. And I, as an American, I'm used to the office being totally cleared out at 5 p.m. on a Friday night. When I looked over, when the clock struck 5 p.m., I looked over, and all these Chinese people in these offices, I mean, there's like hundreds of them, none of them fucking moved. They all stayed and they kept working. So then I put my head down, worked longer, and at 6 p.m. I looked up, and most of the people in those offices were still there working their asses off 6 p.m. on a Friday night. You would never see that in the United States, and God forbid you never even seen anything remotely like that in Europe or Canada. Are you fucking kidding? It's hilarious. So when the United States collapses, yes, it's going to cause problems for China, but China, unlike Americans, the Chinese and most Asian cultures will roll up their sleeves and get their asses to work and turn shit around, because that's how hard they work. We don't work hard, we as Americans. We don't work hard anymore. We used to back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. We don't anymore. Americans, as I've said many times, are too fat, too beta, too low T, and too drug addicted, and too addicted to TV and weed and Oxycontin and all that crap to work as hard as the Chinese. And again, when I say Chinese, I'm generalizing it. It is other Asian cultures besides China. And then next one, China, and I've mentioned this before, China, India, and various other places in Asia have been buying up all the gold in the world. So, boy, will that be interesting to see what happens when America collapses, when China and places like India are hanging on to all this goddamn gold. It's going to be crazy. So yes, China and Asia will have some problems when the United States collapses. But these problems are not nearly as big as you think they will be. And these problems will be much shorter in duration than you think they will. Just because America collapses does not mean that China is fucked or Asia is fucked for the next 25 years. No, they'll go through some rough years and they will adjust and they will be just fine. They will come out of it smelling like a rose. It'll take some time, but they'll be okay. So once again, this concept of, well, hey, if I move out of the United States, there's no point because everywhere else will collapse too. Wrong, 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 wrong across the board. What you're thinking of are places like Canada and the UK. Yes, those places are fucked when America collapses, absolutely. Well, guess what? Don't move to those places. Fucking move to Asia. Move somewhere to South America where the trading partners are not as intense for American trade. You have all kinds of options if you are on the fence about this. Now, let me repeat what I said at the beginning of this podcast. If you absolutely do not want to move out of the United States because you just don't want to fucking move, then fine, stay there. But if you're on the fence about this, if it's something you're thinking of, and you see people on the internet say, well, if America collapses, everything else will be a shithole, so what's the point? Don't buy into that. That's not true. Again, make your decision based on logic and facts. Oh, and by the way, if you want to stay in the United States, don't pull stupid excuses out of your ass. Just be a man and say, I want to stay in the United States. And yes, if it collapses, hey, it collapses and I'll be fucked. But that's my decision, Caleb. Go fuck yourself. Don't come up with this bullshit stuff about, well, I can't move out of the United States because if it collapses, everywhere in the world will collapse too, so I better just stay here. Don't be a pussy. Be strong about your convictions and state what you want to do. Be honest about why you do what you do. You never see me doing this. You never see me pulling up bullshit reasons out of my ass for why I make decisions. I make decisions and I tell you why I make them. And I base them based on fact. There will be plenty of places in the world that will be just fine when America collapses. There will be lots of places, particularly Asia, that will go through some problems, but then come out just fine in a few years. So this excuse is useless. It's kind of silly every time I see it. And I'm sure I'm going to see it again many, many times. And now this time I can just post a link to this podcast and say, wrong, listen to this podcast. The rest of the world will be either fine or go through some temporary problems. Again, when I say the rest of the world, I'm talking about outside of the Western world, which, yes, is fucked, whether or not America collapses, although it will. By the way, the macro concept you should take away from this podcast is get your brain out of the Western world. Stop being Western world centric. Stop thinking that whatever happens to the Western world must automatically happen to the entire rest of the world too. Wrong, 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 wrong. And if you're an American, you've got a real problem with this because Americans are really bad with this. They think America is the world and or the Western world is the world. Wrong-o. Incorrect. There's a reason why all of my flags, and I have about 6 or 7 of them that I'm working on at this very moment, all of my flags are outside of the Western world. There isn't a single flag that I'm working on that is in the West. There's a reason for that. I don't want to be exposed to all the problems that are now occurring in the West and are going to get much, much worse as time goes on. And again, I'll say for the third time, if that doesn't bother you or doesn't bother you as much as it bothers me, and you want to stay in the collapse of the United States forever, that's fine. Just do so using logic and rationality to back up your opinions and not bullshit excuses you're pulling out of your ass or fake bullshit that you see on the internet. Very important. Always make your decisions rationally and objectively with your brain, using facts and your brain and not hopes and your heart. Very important lesson for life. I will see you very soon. Have a good one. Bye.